Welcome to episode 69 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on October 1st, 2021. What a month it has been. My Wool Week adventure is officially over. I just finished my last class with Jeanette Budge and Hazel Tyndall on blocking our knits. Let's get started. Thank you to all of my patrons for making this podcast possible. Your support is really wonderful. Truly, thank you. What a time it has been. I arrived in Shetland a little over a month ago and I'm leaving tomorrow. I will be in London as this episode goes live on Monday. The first 2 weeks of the trip were pretty much spent gathering content for the Shetland Day of Knit+Escape, which was very well received. The first week of that was an absolute joy because it was spent on the interviews and recordings, and it really was a grand time. But then I had to edit all of that video, which is not nearly as fun as having a cup of tea and chatting about knitting and life and all sorts after you just spent an hour or so talking about knitting and life and all sorts. I hope that some of you were able to indulge in a little bit of that Knit+Escape Shetland Day. And also, I hope you were able to be part of the virtual Shetland Wool Week classes. It was a bit of a mystery how the online event was going to pan out, but the videos that came with the membership were extremely well produced. I think my favorite were the Hentelagets, which were a collection of clips from oral histories that were gathered over a couple of decades from people living here in Shetland. Hentelagets are the bits of wool that are left by the sheep on scratching posts and fences and in the heather. The organizers pulled snippets from the oral histories based on themes and then played them back to back in 5 to 10 minute video clips with photos from the time to illustrate what was being talked about. The spinning songs were wonderful. And I loved hearing about the cardings where the women would gather together for the day to card their wool together. And in the evening, the men would arrive and the music would begin and they'd have a dance and just enjoy each other's company until about midnight. I am only through day 5 of the membership videos and I have really enjoyed every single one. They have pulled in people you don't often hear from to take part. And the videos that are lessons are so thorough. I've just been completely impressed. When it came time to buy individual classes rather than the membership, I ended up getting into mostly lace classes. And all of those lace classes were with Elizabeth Williamson, who I'd recently come across on social media not too long before the start of Wool Week. So it was a joy to be in 4 of her classes and come to know her a bit better. The classes were conversational and informative, and Elizabeth is going to be doing some more online classes coming up for lace knitters. I will put her Instagram account in the show notes so you can follow her if you are interested, so that when she announces them, you can get signed up for them. There are several different shawl and lace knitting workshops that she's working on, so do take the time to look into them, as there will likely be at least one that will suit your level and interest. I was also able to attend some in-person events thanks to the Shetland Textile Museum, which opened its doors to folks who were here. My first class was a drop spindle spinning class that was so helpful. I'd been teaching myself through YouTube during the lockdown, but having the instructor in the room was so much more fruitful. She took us through spinning 2 singles of different colors and then taught us how to ply them together. I was so completely tickled by the final product. It is a little hank, about 6 inches long and maybe 2 inches around, and I'll likely never knit with it, but I am so pleased that I actually got through to the point where I had workable yarn. Now the plan is that when I get home, keep going on the fleece that I have been spinning from Garths Croft that Helene sent me back in the spring, and maybe actually get that finished up. We'll see, a little bit at a time. I had another lace class in person at the museum with Sheila Fowley, who is one of the few remaining professional Shetland lace knitters working here. I'll put a link to her website so you can see her work. She mostly knits for weddings at this point, and her work is just gorgeous. We gathered around a table covered with yarn and needles, and she would hand us a pattern and have us grab a yarn and a pair of needles and work it up. And then the next pattern would come out and we'd grab a different yarn and needles and join it in and carry on with the pattern. The point was to see how the effect of the lace is changed when you change the yarn and the needle size and, large needle, small yarn, large, just switching it up. And of course, in the meantime, we're all chatting and getting to know one another and having a lovely time. So that was a Monday, which was also the first of the 2 classes I taught. And I have to admit, I was feeling a bit cringy about my contribution, to be honest. Viveka's lecture is always great, but I felt like my instruction could have been better. I just didn't feel comfortable with how I had to have things arranged in my Airbnb to get it all to work. And I think that physical discomfort was making me feel a bit off kilter about my presentation. Hey ho though. People seem to be picking up what I was laying down, and I cannot express how lovely it has been to see the finished mitt showing up on social media. I'm so utterly proud, especially by those of you who are completing your very first Fair Isle. Well done. Tuesday, I was back at the museum. One of the ladies at this point was like, "Do you want us to just set up a bed for you?" But Tuesday, I was at the museum for a Tatted Rug lecture with Dr. Christiansen from the Shetland Museum and Archives, who had done an in-depth study of them. This was a locally produced in Shetland bed covering. If you just saw it, you might think it was latch hook. That's not how it's constructed at all, but it has that appearance to it. And they were made by local people for local people. They weren't exported. And they were the bed coverings for the married couple in the house, and then whatever kids were sleeping with them that night too, I guess. I'm not going to talk too much about the class now because I bought her book on the topic, and I think I'm going to read up on it more before I talk about it on the podcast. Suffice it to say, she pulled in information about weaving and dyeing and spinning and folklore and daily life, and it was just utterly fascinating. I could have stayed another hour or 2 and listened to her talk about it. Listener Jillian was in the class with me, and we ended up going to lunch together. The listener lunch was the next day, and I said, I thought we ought to get some name tags for everyone, because oftentimes when you meet your friends from online, you know them as their username, not their actual name. So some name tags would help. And Jillian joked that we should knit them. Well, as Jolene said the following day, you can't say things like that in front of Anne. So Jillian and I were down to Jamieson's to get yarn for name tags, and I put a note on the event posting and in my Instagram stories and got to work that night. It was so cool to see how everyone managed their tags. I did mine as a tube about 7 inches around, and I did a checkerboard across half to be the backside, and then the other half is where I used to knit my name, and then I held it flat together and closed up the top and bottom, put a safety pin on the back. Boom, we got a pin, we got a name tag. Some people incorporated Fair Isle patterns into theirs. Edna, Harriet's sister of Harriet's hats, she used Harriet's hat colors for hers. They were each just so individual and so creative. Oh, Jackie actually made a little sweater and put Jacks across the front of it. It was so cute. You guys, I was so impressed by the name tags. And I only gave you certainly less than 24 hours to figure it out. I was just so impressed. They were awesome. Speaking of Harriet's hat, people keep asking me how much they raised. And so I asked, and the answer is that they don't know. The last Harriet knew they were at 103,000 pounds. The patterns are still all for sale though, and they are continuing to go toward the fund while the arrangements are being made for the MRI scanner for Shetland. They don't know when it's coming. Everything's still pear-shaped because of COVID. I do apologize, I can't offer more details for folks, but there are no details to be offered at this point. We need to just be patient, watch the media, we'll get updated when we find out. So the listener lunch, absolutely fantastic. And then that evening, I was back at the museum for the last time for a knit and natter. It was a lovely time. There were so many of us that they had to split us between 2 rooms. And when the snacks were brought out for everybody, they swapped half of the people in one room for half of the people in the other. So we got to meet other people. And I finally got to have a chat with listener Mary at that point, which was lovely, and met a group of ladies who were up from Suffolk, who were a hoot and a half. I just cannot tell you how uplifting Wednesday was. It was a blend of old friends and new friends and online friends who became in-person friends and running into people I'd met earlier in the week. And I went to bed feeling absolute joy and contentment after that glorious day spent with so many people. I hope that if you were part of it, that you enjoyed Wednesday as much as I did. And if you weren't here and you're still dealing with lockdowns and spikes and all the other madness, hang in there. Hang in there. There is joy yet in the world. I think I'm going to stop now on that thought. There is joy yet in the world. If you need to be finding it in quiet moments of steam rising from your tea as you knit a few rounds in the morning, or in the sunrise, or in an online knit and natter, or the turning of the color of a leaf, find it. Because my biggest takeaway from this week, from Shetland Wool Week, has been the reminder of just how lovely people are. Utterly lovely. We have been through a lot. And a lot of us have been through it alone or with far fewer people than we're used to being with. This last long while has worked to take away the memory of just how lovely people are from many of us. And for some of us, we are able to get people back in our lives again. And if you're not yet able, keep finding the joy where you can. Hang in. It's been a week, guys. It's been a month. I need a nap. Clearly. This was going to be a short intro to an interview, and I've gone on for ages. I need to get myself together and packed tonight because I am leaving in the morning. So let me just remind you of a few quick things. There's not going to be any songs or such today, and I do apologize, but I have to put this episode together as a bit of chaos is going on with travel, so I have to keep things simple. First, Knit New Haven has a 10% discount running if you purchase 5 hanks of fingering weight wool for the upcoming Stephen West Mystery Knit Along. Check out knitnewhaven.com for details. I'm pretty sure I'm going to take the plunge on this mystery knit along. So plunge along with me. Fingers crossed I like it when it's over. I'm so nervous. That's a lot of yarn to invest in a mystery. Let's do it together, guys. Morehouse Farms Open Farm Day is coming up on October 15th. You do have to register for a free time slot. You don't have to pay to come. They just need to space people because of parking and social distancing and all that sort of stuff. So I will put a link in the show notes for that. Knitting in the Presence of Sheep is in the last time slot of the day, but I will be there all day long. So come and say hi to me. I want to meet you. There has been a request to do a meetup at Rhinebeck Sheep and Wool itself. I have not had the mental space to plan for that. Please watch the Facebook group for details or follow me on Instagram and I'll try to get something arranged. Nothing major. It will be on the Saturday because that's the day I'm going. And I'll figure out a place and time and let you know. As I said, Facebook group, Instagram. If I can get my act together, I'll even send a note on the mailing list. We'll see if I can get my act together. Okay, interview. Dang, I've already cried in this episode. Sorry, Mandy Moore. Crying before your interview. That seems rude. But I really am so happy to bring this interview to you. Mandy Moore is a lovely woman, originally from England, but she spent many of her formative years living here in Shetland, was away for a while, and recently moved back. And when the lockdown started, she started recording some of her designs for our benefit. She publishes them as Olach Designs on Ravelry. That's Olach. I'll always have a link in the show notes for you, you know. I have knit her Print of the Wave beanie and Alexandra capelet, and I love them both. I'm currently knitting another print of the wave beanie in a deep red from Uradale as a knit along with participants in the Mackinac Our Way Through Shetland Lace Weeks. I will be posting about that on my Instagram though, so if you want to join in, grab some DK weight yarn, find the pattern on Ravelry and join in with us. We only just barely started on the first and we're only doing 5 rounds a day, so you could totally catch up with us. I am also leaving Shetland with all of the forgotten colors from Jamieson's of Shetland to use to knit myself another Alexandra capelet. So as part of Shetland Wool Week, Jamieson's of Shetland has been posting on their Instagram account their 8 least purchased colors. And it's totally baffling because they are all lovely colors. Some of them I was like, oh my gosh, that's gorgeous. And so they're not hated colors, they're just forgotten. They've been overlooked for a while. So it was a brilliant idea to get those colors back in front of our eyes again. And I was able to get all of them. I got enough of them that I could knit myself another capelet because I do love it that much. I wanted another one. And I thought it would be a perfect project for them because it requires 8 colors. Boom, 8 colors, 8 colors, perfect. We'll see how it works up. But I know I always need more capelets in my life, right? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to play the interview for you now. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed talking to Mandy originally, and I will see you on the other side. Mandy, can you tell me what your connection is with Shetland?
I first moved to Shetland in about 1978. My dad moved up here as he got a job with the oil industry. Mm-hmm. He was a fireman in the north of England and saw an opportunity for a fire officer on the oil terminal. And we all moved up with him. Before then, I'd never heard of it. I was just a small child. And we lived in quite a busy, built-up city area. Uh-huh. So moving up here was a bit of a culture shock, shall we say, yeah. And I think especially for likes of my mum and dad who didn't know any different. Mm-hmm. And I stayed up here for about 10 years and left when I was 17. And then about 2 years ago, my husband and I decided it was time to move back home. So we moved back to
Is your husband a Shetlander too?
He's not a Shetlander, but like myself, he moved up as a child and lived here for about 10 years.
And did you know each other before you moved down, or did you meet in the south?
We met up here at school.
Okay.
He's a couple of years older than me, but we met at school.
Okay. Sorry, I just was curious.
Yeah.
And what are some of your early memories of knitting and learning to knit?
I was taught to knit by my granny. I was the eldest of 3 girls, and I think when my sisters were quite small, my mum found us quite a handful. And my dad was a fireman and he was out working shifts and things. So I used to get sent to Granny's house to keep me quiet and and to give me things to do. And my granny, my granddad was a coal miner, and he again worked shifts and mainly night shifts. So to keep me quiet during the day, Granny started me off making and doing, and she was the most fantastic crafter. She did sewing, she did crochet, she did lace making, she knitted. So I was lucky because she taught me lots.
That's wonderful.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to have you on the show for 2 reasons. And the first reason is because you are a sample knitter for several different designers. And I've never actually spoken to a sample knitter before about what that entails and how that works. So first of all, how did you get started doing that?
The first one I did, it was a sample for Kate Davis, and we were she chose several different people who were in her Ravelry group. Okay. And she was looking at the way we worked with colour. So we all had very different ideas about which colours went together. And I think that's how I was chosen, because perhaps I have a different slant on how I choose them to other people. And from there, word of mouth really, that the other knitters asked me to knit samples for them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So did When you say word of mouth, was it Kate Davies mentioning
I think
you? Or
so,
was
yes.
It? Oh,
yeah, I've never found out exactly how, but I got an email out of the blue from a couple of designers saying, we've heard you do sample knitting, and would you be keen to do some for us?
Very nice. So as what is the process like as a sample knitter? So you've agreed to knit a sample for someone. What happens next?
Usually I'll get an email through saying, do you have a slot that you could do such and such a garment for us, and a time scale, and usually I have to look quite closely and see what else I've got lined up.
Right.
And then I usually get a draft pattern emailed through to me, and again asked if I can still fit that in, because sometimes obviously some garments are more complicated than others. And from there, if I'm all okay with it, I then get sent the yarn samples to work with, and start knitting.
And then you start knitting, and then it just gets sent back.
It gets sent back, yeah.
Designers.
Sometimes, because the patterns are in draft form, there are sometimes queries about the way the designer wants them done. So that can sometimes add on a little bit of time, because you're waiting for them to respond or get back to you.
At that point, are the patterns pretty much established though, and you're just sort of letting them know something's unclear, or are they looking for feedback as you're doing it?
They're more looking, on the whole, the patterns are pretty much fully written. There might be the odd typo or the odd numbers out, but they're pretty much fully written. We're not doing it as a technical edit, we're doing it more as a knitting the design sample and making sure that it knits up just how the designer envisaged it.
And then is that something that's used in the photography for the book, or given to yarn shops?
It's usually for the books. The ones that, like, so for example, I knit for Mary Wallen, and usually the sample goes off for her model to wear in the books. And though also occasionally she does sell samples of her work, or sometimes if pieces from previous books get worn out because they've been at trade shows and things, then I might be asked to knit a replacement one.
Interesting. Okay. Are there any challenges that you face as a sample knitter?
I think, because I consider myself quite an experienced knitter, I've been knitting since I was 4 and I'm 50 something now. I do find sometimes that perhaps a designer will choose a way to do something that I might not necessarily have chosen to do myself. But it's not my place to change that. I'm doing it because that's the way the pattern's written, and that's how the designer envisaged it. And that can be a challenge, because I don't always agree, but it's not my place to change things. And I can make a suggestion, but again, it's not for me to say, really.
And what's your favorite part about?
Just really seeing, I like looking at the construction. I like it, especially if it's an unusual shape. Or I did the Dathan sweater for Kate Davis, which was a bat-winged type, knitted in the round, and that was an interesting construction. And I like seeing things like that, because it's a bit different. And and the colours, because sometimes I'll get yarn that's not been released yet, or a new range of colours, which is dangerous as well, because then I immediately want to have some. But that's fun, because you get to see things before they're out there.
Yeah, and I think, man, I would have a hard time with that, because I want to put everything on Instagram.
Exactly. That can be hard. And I did a knit for Mary Wallen last year during lockdown last summer, and because of lockdown the book release has been delayed and things, and I've not been able to share it at all, and it's due to come out very soon, but I want to show, so that's fun.
Well, you've mentioned color a few times, and that you have a different way of putting colors together. That sort of leads us into the other reason why I want to talk to you, is that you have started recording your designs into patterns. And I'm interested, first of all, when you started designing on your own, sort of branching out away from patterns. And I'm also curious about when you made the decision and got started creating your patterns for other people.
I'd always kind of made up my own things, even from being very tiny. I would make up a jumper pattern for my dolly and things like that, or a jumper for my granny's cat and things like that. And so I always kind of tried to make something myself, and I think probably being a bit rebellious, I didn't always like to follow the pattern and the rules. And I think as well, I always like to tweak a pattern to fit me. So if I knew, like I've got long arms, so I always knew I needed to add extra here, and you know, a bit of shaping on the shoulders where I'm not as broad. And so I think from there I then started to think, well, if I'm doing this, I can then alter them and write my own.
Right.
I started first designing more seriously about 10 years ago, and I used to sell what I made. So I would supply an arts and crafts gallery of the items that I made.
Okay.
And friends and family were always saying, you should write this down. Why don't you sell your patterns? Never had the confidence, never had, you know, the courage to go out there and do that, thinking who's going to understand what I can write. But then lockdown came last year, and I was one of the group of people advised to shield, to stay at home during lockdown. And I thought, what am I going to do? How am I going to keep busy? And my husband said, well, why don't you do what you've always said you were going to do and release your patterns? And I did.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's so great to have that support for it.
Yeah.
So you're designing as Olach Designs. Do you want to share what that name means for us?
Well, first, when I went to register myself on Ravelry as Mandy Moore, there was already another designer out there called Mandy Moore. And I thought, what on earth am I going to use? So I've always been fascinated by the Gaelic language. I don't speak it, but I'm fascinated by it. And I started looking at Gaelic words for Scots Gaelic, for woolly and oily and wool and sheep. And Olach is the Gaelic word for woolly, and it's also the Gaelic word for oily. And because my husband and my father both worked in the oil industry, I thought that would fit quite nicely.
That's nice, yeah. Now, as you said, I'm coming back to color again, because one of the things that I love about your designs is your use of color. It just seems very joyful. Your use of color seems very happy to me. And so I'm curious about how you go about choosing your colors.
I'm quite a keen photographer. I'm not a good photographer, but I'm a keen one. And I've always got a camera or a phone on me, and I take photos wherever we go. And my husband laughs at me quite a lot because I'm taking photos of the oddest things, like a pile of tangled fishing nets and things like that. And I see colours in those. So that's usually a starting point. And sometimes the colour comes before the design. So like, for example, the Oliberry beanie, which I released recently, the colours were what inspired me for that one, because I looked at the colours on the beach and the shore, the lichens, the colour of the sea, and then worked from there. And otherwise, sometimes I've come up with a design, but I'm not sure which way to go colour-wise, and I'll then start looking through my photos for inspiration as well. So I've just done a design recently for a cardigan that's not out yet, the Smurican cardigan. And I really didn't know which way to go with colours. And I was flicking through ones on my phone, and I found a picture of fuchsias in my garden. And I decided the purple and pink went together quite well.
And it's lovely. I've seen images
You've seen
of
it.
And that's the one you were working on at the Textile Museum,
at the Textile
right?
Museum,
it's beautiful.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's being test knitted just now, so hopefully
so
not too long. Yep.
Not too long to wait, guys. What are some of your other pieces that you're particularly proud of?
I think the first one I'm most proud of is probably my Alexandra capelet, the one you've made, and that's because it was my very first pattern that I released, and it's special to me because it's one of the first things I designed for my sister, and because it's the first one that I actually wrote down and took time and got it test knitted and published. And it was a big learning curve, writing in a style that other people can understand, and but it's probably the one I'm I'm probably most pleased with. And it's not necessarily my most popular one, but it's the one I have.
Interesting. Well, I'm in love with it, so I won't shut up about it. I think people are sick of hearing about it from me. And I just think it's beautiful.
And I'm not a natural lace knitter. I like lace knitting, but because it's a lace pattern as well, having the challenge of writing in that style is,
I think it's a great taster project for lace, because it's a learnable pattern. You know, you don't have to stay married to the pattern. After a few rounds, you have it down. And then the color changes that happen through it also keep it interesting too. So it's not like, oh, I'm doing the same 4 rows over. You know, you get the color changes, and so it gets to be addictive. You know, oh, 1 more row, and you know, work your way through it.
I think a lot of people are daunted by lace patterns because they think it has to be super fine and massive shawls or very complicated, and it doesn't need to be. I also wrote a pattern for a chunky weight shawl. Jamieson's of Shetland asked me to write some patterns using their chunky yarn, so I came up with a lace shawl for them as well. And again, it was a way of trying to show that you don't have to choose the very finest cobweb yarn. You can use anything you can knit with,
Right. And I think some people think, like, see a lot of the Shetland lace patterns that are sort of out there for modernly designed ones use the jumper weight wool or a DK or something like that, and people sort of see it as, I don't know, cheating or something. You know, like, oh, we're doing this the easy way, but knitters have been using those weights to knit lace all along. You know, you would not wear a super fine white lace all over shawl in your everyday life. The knitters here were knitting haps and stuff that were sort of the day-to-day shawls all the time in the thicker wool. So you're not cheating, guys. This is normal Shetland lace also. You also designed the Print of the Wave beanie in lace using DK. Do you want to tell us where the inspiration for that came from?
That was, there'd been an article on the news about how Shetland lace knitting was becoming in it one of the Craft Council of the UK's endangered crafts. And I thought, well, I know there's a lot of lace knitters out there. So I tried to come up with something that would maybe again be an introduction to lace knitting for people. It wouldn't be too daunting, using a heavier wool but using a traditional Shetland lace stitch pattern, which was a Print of the Wave. So that was quite a fun knit. I quite enjoyed doing that one, but it was the body of the hat I found quite straightforward, but trying to work out the crown and work out the stitch counts and things, that was
the
good
decreases in lace
as
you go through. And those of you who are signed up for the Macking Our Way Through Shetland tours, this is the hat that we are casting on, or by the time this comes out, it will have been cast on October 1st to knit to wear on our tours. So first of all, thank you for designing it, because I loved it so much. I was like, let's do this. So you mentioned your Smorican cardigan. Am I saying that right? The Smorican cardigan, which is so sweet. Do you have anything else that you're working out right now?
I've got a few different things. I've got a lopey weight jumper, a sweater, which I'm working on at the moment as well. And that was inspired by the coastline of Shetland around Deepdale, on the west coast of Shetland. And that was a combination of both colour and landscape that inspired me for that one. The landscape around there is quite jagged and quite dramatic, so I've done quite a jaggy pattern. And it's also got the most wonderful turquoise waters around there on a good day. So I've introduced some of those colours into it too.
That sounds intriguing.
Yes, I've not designed anything before in a sweater in that weight of yarn, but I think it'll be quite striking when it's done. And it's one that's perhaps a bit more unisex as well, because I was very conscious that the majority of the things I've made, apart from hats of course, but the garments I've designed were very feminine in shape, and I was trying to look for something that was perhaps more appealing to everybody.
Everyone,
I'm also working on a sweatshirt style, jumper at the moment. And that was inspired by, I've got a much loved old sweatshirt that I've had for about, forever, 15 years. And it's getting really worn, and I've tried to find one to replicate it. Tried, every shop I could possibly think of.
Yeah.
And then my husband said to me one day, why don't you knit one? So I did. And it's just about there. I just need to get that one test knitted.
Wonderful.
But that's, yeah.
Well, gold stars to your husband for properly prodding you at times.
I think he's heard me go on so much about this over the years that eventually he's thought, no, just do it. You need to do this. Yeah.
So where, I am intrigued, I know, and I know other people are going to want to have a look at these. Where can people find your patterns?
At the moment, online, they're on Ravelry and LoveCrafts,
okay.
Both under Olach Designs.
Okay.
And the patterns that I've designed for Jamieson's using their wool are found on the Jamieson's website as well.
Okay.
I've just recently started doing the patterns as hard copies as well. So Jamieson's of Shetland is stocking those, and there's a couple of wool shops on the mainland stocking them, including a new shop that's just opened up in Stirling that's looking to perhaps teach some of the more traditional crafts as well.
Oh, okay.
So they're going to be teaching weaving and spinning and things like that. So
do you know what's the name of the shop?
It's called the Curry Collective.
Okay. And it's in Stirling.
It's in Stirling.
Okay.
Yeah. I think they've been opened
city.
About 3 weeks or something.
Oh,
It's
wow.
very new.
Very new. Everybody go check it out. It's a good excuse to go to Stirling. It's one of my favorite places in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mandy, for coming in and talking to us about your designs. I'm really looking forward to several of the patterns we talked about. And I really have just been so impressed with the patterns that you've been releasing, and I'm really surprised that it's taken you so long to start writing them down, because they are so impressive.
Thank you. And thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you again, Mandy, for taking the time to come to my little Airbnb and sit down for that little interview. It was a true joy to meet you in person on this trip, and I'm looking forward to getting together with you again when I am back. All of Mandy's links will be in the show notes. Go poke through her patterns on Ravelry. They really are lovely. A few more things before I go. The next episode is going to be the last for a bit. I'm going to be taking some time off to rest my brain and my spirit, in case, bursting into tears in the middle of recording this was not enough of a sign that I need a bit of a break. The last few months have been full and joyful, but I need to also have some quiet and reconnection time. So just a heads up that the break is coming up. I do 14 episode seasons. That's going to get us to episode 70. I'm not quite sure when I'll come back. It'll probably be after Thanksgiving, which means early December for those of you who aren't in the US. In the meantime, don't forget about the Mystery Knit Along with Stephen West and the 10% off from Knit New Haven for that. Don't forget about Open Farm Day on the 15th for Morehouse Farm. Don't forget about the mini knit along of the Print of the Wave beanie on my Instagram and the Macking Our Way Through Shetland participants Facebook group. And don't forget to tie your shoes, because I'd hate to have you tripping everywhere. I'll see you in a few weeks. And in the meantime, thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you'd like to support the show, please visit patreon.com/IThoughtIKnewHow to make a monthly pledge. You may also consider making a purchase from one of our sponsors by visiting the website IThoughtIKnewHow.com and clicking the link at the top that says Be a Booster. While you are on the site, you can also find the show notes for each episode. Thank you ever so much to my patrons, to Knit New Haven, and to Morehouse Farm for sponsoring the podcast. Find me on my social media accounts as I Thought I Knew How, except on Twitter, where it's just Thought I Knew How. The groups on various platforms are all called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time